Hello people, welcome to another subscriber Q&A video. This, just to recap the purpose of this. Any of my Twitch subs that are in my Discord have a dedicated channel to ask me sub questions and another dedicated channel to chat with me, which I interact with more than I do with the general one. You can find the link below in the description to join my Discord server. Even if you're not a sub to me on Twitch, you can still hang out with other fans and stuff. So let's begin. C9Java T Lull, I don't know, C9J Avert Lull, I don't fucking know what your name is. Sideshow, who do you think is the best Zarya in the league so far? I think, honestly, that there's a bunch of them at the top, and then it's kind of take your pick. I think Nene would be the person that I would gravitate to first, along with Sinatra, Sominsu, and Decay, probably. Those are the top four for me. And I think that of those four, the one with the most different playstyle is Sinatra. Likes to shoot behind shields a lot. Likes to take off angles. I think the rest of them prefer to play a little more with their team. And still output a lot of damage, but tend to get more eliminations, tend to help their Rhine with aggressive plays a little more. Nene tends to use bubbles very early on, but that's part of New York's style, is to try and sucker you into going for the punch and then counterpunch you. I personally think that Nene is probably the best Zarya in the league. Sominsu is also very talented, far more talented than I expected him to be when I was first coming into the league. When he was first coming into the league. And I want to see more from Decay as well. Unfortunately, it looks like the Zarya play may all disappear, but there we go. The Leogend says, what do you think of the new 7-match style stage? I like it, but it means the team ranks per stage are a mess, and some teams that don't deserve it or are very close to making playoffs, and teams are lower seeds than they shouldn't be. Shock. Okay, I mean, maybe I messed up the reading of that question, but it didn't seem to quite make grammatical sense to me, but I understand where you're coming from. So, basically, I think reducing the stage to 7 matches was, first of all, a requirement, because if you try and play a full round robin with the teams that you have, or just, so if you try and just play a full round robin, almost like we did last year. Last year you played 9 out of 10 of the other teams. No, wait, sorry. You played 10 out of 11 of the teams in the league last year. If you tried to do that again this year, it wouldn't make that many more matches for each team, but it would make a huge amount more matches for the league as a whole. I mean, we'd be running the fucking Overwatch League for 10 months out of the year, something like that, which doesn't give a very good off-season, and it would drag a little bit, and I don't think it would keep the kind of the pacing that you'd want. I think it'd be too much Overwatch. So with this many teams in the league, I think the 7-match stage is a nice way of doing it. The overall schedule as well means that you play within your you play more within your division. You play 2 times of all of the teams within your division, once outside. That's presumably going to have make more sense once teams are actually playing home and away games. And I think that it does make power rankings much more important. The whole reason that I and Monty and people have put so much, and Benchmom and stuff, have put so much focus on power rankings this season is because the standings aren't going to tell the story. And even the overall standings might even tell the story worse the more data that it acquires. Because when the patch changes, say there's a dramatic patch change from stage 1 to stage 2, and suddenly the Washington Justice are the best team in the league, but the standings, because they got battered in stage 1, the overall standings are going to very badly reflect that. And or perhaps even, let's use Philadelphia as an example. Their strength of schedule very easy in stage 1, strength of schedule very difficult in stage 2. So not only does the strength of schedule switch, but also the patch as well. So I don't think that the 7-match stage should be changed in any sense. I think, though, it's something you just have to keep in mind. And it's also something that you have to keep in mind for most American traditional sports. So people should be fairly used to it. It means that the stage playoffs are a little wonky because there's so little data to go on. I mean, teams could go 4-3 against pretty easy teams and be able to make it to the stage playoffs. Dallas nearly made the stage playoffs. Houston nearly made the stage playoffs. All kind of insane. And so I feel bad for teams like the Charge, and I mean maybe even Paris or something. Or Gladiators. I think Charge and Gladiators are the two big teams that really missed out on playoffs due to a combination of strength of schedule. Charge had to play the Titans twice, and period of underperformance. For the Gladiators, when they brought in Decay, they first of all had a bunch of apparently communication issues and were really underperforming. But both of those two teams were playoff caliber by the time we got to the end. It's unfortunate, but shit happens in a format like this, and if you were going to try and avoid it, you'd have to add more matches. And I think the compromise that Overwatch League has come to is the best one, because if you tried to add in more matches, it would get very stale, and we'd be playing until November. Precoixious asks, do you think all the changes will kill goats? It depends what you mean by kill. I think it'll cripple goats. I think it'll be one very maimed goat. The Lucio changes are the biggest thing for me. I think when you have a goat's composition that relies so much on gap closing, and none of the goat's pieces have natural gap closing ability. It's not like Genji or Tracer or Winston or any of this stuff that have movement abilities that can get in your face. Goats as a comp has a lot of like slow moving things like Brig and Ryan and Zarya, and they're given that gap closing ability by the Lucio speed boost. So kind of the nerf or the way that those heroes are balanced, i.e. they can't play on high ground, they're not very fast, they can't get in your face quickly, is mitigated a lot by the fact that you have a Lucio in the comp. So the changes to Lucio's speed boost that now mean that you don't go the speed of light every time he presses E. I think that's really going to hurt goats. I think if you try and run a goats comp into a Sombra Pharah or something like this, or Sombra like a Pharah Junkrat, or some kind of spammy composition, I think that it's going to tear you to pieces now. You can't go from cover to cover very quickly, and you can't find a target and engage on them very fast. Goats was previously super good at even being able to beat, dive and stuff like that. Not just because you can brig bash and kill the DPS that are on you, but also because you can just run down supports before you can get killed. Like, you can find somebody that you might have to rotate for like 30 seconds to be able to find a target that you can actually run over. But because you can constantly move, and because Lucio speed boost is on quite a low cooldown, you can eventually even pick off the D.Va or the Winston. Like, teams used to be able to pick off the front line of dive with like a quad tank or a goats composition, because you'd force the movement ability out of the D.Va, for example, and then use your speed boost to run her down and demech and then kill her. So I think the Lucio one is massive. Discord less so, because you can still have a lot of value running Ana in goats and stuff like that. But I do think these changes will be enough. And the maps that we're moving into, stuff like Gibraltar, I wonder whether we would have even seen goats on those maps. But the biggest thing to take into account is that the reason that goats was played was not because it was the best composition all the time. The reason that goats was played is because when you have very rock, paper, scissors metas, you can't keep cycling through rock, paper, scissors. You lose momentum. If you're a defensive team and you're holding close on, I don't know, say you're holding close on Rialto, you have to pick a comp, and you have to actually defend with it. So if the attackers can go back into spawn and switch onto something that that hard counters you, you're fucked. And then as they are attacking, if you switch onto a comp that hard counters them, boom, they're fucked, and now they have to go back to spawn. And if the meta truly was rock paper scissors, it would have no momentum. You'd lose all of your ults. You wouldn't be able to win multiple team fights in a row. This kind of stuff. So Goats was so powerful as a composition because it didn't have a hard counter. It had some soft counters, but you could play around them, and it had and it was very good against a lot of different comps. So if you are forced to swap to something crazy to be able to defeat Goats, that isn't going to be enough. Like, if you can, because Goats already suffered against quad DPS, right? But you can't run quad DPS all the time. It's map dependent, but also if you run quad DPS, let's actually throw up an example. Okay, so you're attacking Dorado. Or say you're defending. Well, it works either way. Say you're attacking or defending an escort map, and the enemy team's got Goats. You could go quad DPS, and you could beat them, but you would only win one fight, and then they'd come back, and they'd either be playing dive, or they'd be playing some adjustment, and they'd beat you, and then you'd have to swap. And by swapping, you ruin your momentum, and you just eventually are going to allow them to move. So if the changes still require people to play an outlandish composition to beat Goats, then that might not be enough. Because what will truly kill Goats is a composition that is that works against Goats, but also works against a bunch of other stuff. Like, if Dive could beat Goats, that would be fine, because Dive is also super versatile. You can play it against a bunch of different stuff. If, like, Double Sniper or something like that could work against Goats, then you can play Double Sniper against a range of other things. Like, there are a few core compositions that you can play on every map and still have a lot of success. But momentum is a huge portion of this, and, like, basically the comp that we'll see in the meta in Stage 2 will need to not have a hard counter. Because if it has a hard counter, then you end up just cycling through different hard counters. So teams never do that. They just pick a composition that's very versatile. And Goats was very versatile. I feel like I did a horrible job of explaining that, but hopefully you understood what I meant. babyblu says, are there any banana brain comments that genuinely tilt you, or do you just laugh 100% of them off? Nothing tilts me on the internet. Like, genuinely nothing. You know, in the moment, things can be funny, or they can be, you know, comedically rage-inducing. But I've never... In fact, it's been fucking years since I got angry or felt... tilted or sad or felt bad about anything that I read on the internet or actually in any interaction. I just don't really, I'm not that kind of person. I don't genuinely get angry. I don't get tilted. Whenever I read, like, I don't know how this happened actually. I wish I could teach other people, but when I see comments that are deliberately horribly mean to me, I find them really fucking funny. I don't know. I think it's not even that I assume the people are joking. I just find, I find horrible, insulting, rude behavior very funny when it's aimed at me. I feel bad when it's aimed at other people, and I feel sorry for them, and I don't, it eats up some of my coworkers, when they read these horrible Reddit comments and stuff, or people DM them awful shit. But when I get those comments, I find them, I sometimes am nearly pissing myself laughing at them. I find them so funny. I don't know why, but it seems to be a pretty good mentality to have, because you do get a lot of horrible shit on the internet. Pogey says, how do you think some Overwatch World Cup teams would fare in OWL given their 12-man rosters and same head coach? South Korea would probably be busted, but interested in what you have to say about Canada, China, USA, and Finland. Okay, So let's start out by going big picture. Overwatch World Cup is not the most competitive thing in the world. The teams haven't had much time to practice together. The teams don't take it that seriously. And in general, apart from Team Korea, basically, forcing the players to be from one country reduces the skill level massively. Like, for example, actually, the teams that you listed it's fair enough, isn't it? But I mean, for Canada, for example, like you couldn't pick up like a true main tank that had been practicing all the time. You had to go for XQC, and they were playing with what was the name of the guy that they had on Crimzo, right? Who's not like he's not in Owl at the moment. I'm not gonna say too much other than that in terms of his skill, but you know what I mean. Like these aren't super teams because you've already put the restriction. You've already blinkered yourself to requiring them to be from the same country. So it only really works for countries that have an outrageous amount of talent already, like South Korea. Okay, so Overwatch World Cup teams are pretty much... they are like... in general, they're worse than the contenders' regions. The respective contenders' regions. So the South Korean World Cup team, when they played at the World Cup, they were worse than the top contenders teams in Korea. The Team France and Team UK were worse than the top European contenders teams. The only one that was probably better than their respective region was China, because the talent in China is horribly spread out. The talent in China is kind of... It's weird, right? Because it's one country again. It's like Korea, but Korea has so much talent that they have no problem spreading it out. You get loads of really good teams. But China doesn't have the same level of talent as Korea, but it still tries to make the same number of teams from that small amount of talent. So you end up having pretty shit teams, honestly, in China. Given that the Chinese World Cup team was really, really good, comparatively, the contenders teams are pretty shit. So China really was like a super team. Then when you go over to USA, like the US contenders teams, I don't know whether they were better. But the USA is a bit of a different story, isn't it? Because they import a lot of talent. So it's not really the same as Europe or Korea or China. So each of the contender scenes themselves are fairly interesting. And actually, I would be interested to know how USA and Canada did against the NA contenders teams. I imagine that they were worse. Again, a similar story to Team South Korea. Worse than the best contenders teams. So I think Team South Korea would be a top-level team if they had more time, obviously. These players are just too talented. The Team China, I think, was genuinely a super team from China. And unfortunately, those players, or some of those players, aren't 18 yet. But when they are, I hope to see a full Chinese roster in Overwatch League that can perform at a very high level. Unfortunately, some of the talent got kind of split across multiple teams, right? Like Spark got Guswa and Crystal, and Eileen went to Charge. Yveltal went to thingy, what are they called? Hunters. So yeah, Team USA and Team Finland. Now, I was told that Team Finland was losing to Giganti, who were full finish, or were like worse than Giganti, who were full finish at the time. But the reason that these players didn't get picked up for Team Finland, I assume, is because Giganti at the time were busy with contenders, so they couldn't really practice for the World Cup. And maybe the people coaching Team Finland, I think it must have been Sater, but I actually don't know off the top of my head who coached Team Finland, were maybe hoping that they could get a better roster with the Overwatch League experience. But I'm pretty sure, like, Team Finland, if they were playing an Owl, they might be an okay team. I think you could make a very good Finnish team, but you should probably use some of that talent that was left off Team Finland in the World Cup from Giganti. I mean, guys like Cloudy, I think, have got a lot of potential, more potential than Fraggy, and so should probably be on that roster. RCK, probably better than Zappis at the time, and probably now as well. Although, I think Zappis is alright as well. Who else? Who did they have on DPS? I guess they had Linkser, right? Did they have Linkser and Davin? I actually can't remember the World Cup. Anyway, like, you know, Davin I think would be pretty decent. I think you could make one good Finnish roster in the Overwatch League, and you would still have a bunch of good subs. Like, I'd have Fraggy on the bench, I'd have Reaper on the bench. Yeah, and then Big Goose, Shaz. I mean, you could make a good Overwatch League team out of that. But again, at that time, they weren't as good as the Contenders teams. Anyway, let's move on. Dip says, is it fair to say Runner and Huk are the two best talent spotters we have in Overwatch? Toronto Esports produced so many top players as well as picking up talent from obscure regions, and Runaway's continued dominance with a team of rookies. Yes, 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 yes. Having said that, we don't know whether it's actually Runner and Huk who are doing it. Right? Like, somebody involved with Boston and Toronto Esports is doing a fucking great job at scouting. Like, really, really good. Might be Huk, but a few times when I've seen Huk on, like, interview shows and stuff like that, he doesn't seem to have a very in-depth knowledge of contender scenes and upcoming players and stuff like that. I mean, maybe he just doesn't want to discuss it, but he didn't seem to be crazy knowledgeable about the players and scouting. So I think it's more likely that Huk has a team of people or one guy or something like this who's really good at going out and scouting. But it might be Huk, I'm not sure. I think Huk is more like the organizational mastermind, you know, that runs everything. As for Runner, I don't know whether it's Runner or Flowervin or the coaching staff that they have behind them who are doing the scouting, but again, unbelievable. But there's two differences, or there's differences between these two that make them different in the ways that they scout, and different in the ways that you should credit their scouting. Toronto Esports and Boston Uprising seem to deliberately go out and find hidden gems from regions, which means that they don't have to pay as much for them, and they can get big value for money and sell them on to other teams afterwards, and still actually put up pretty good performances. Whereas Runaway, I might be wrong in saying this because I don't have the inside scoop on a lot of Korean stuff because I don't speak Korean, but it seems like the way that Runaway operates is, we need a new team, apply to trial for us, and they send it out, and because Runaway are so famous and people really want to play for that team, they just get everybody and their nans trialing for them. And at that point, they're really good at picking out the absolute best talents that they have trialing for them. So it's a little bit of, a flipped system. Toronto seem to be very good at spotting talent that are playing in other teams and going out and deliberately acquiring them and trialing them and finding them. Whereas Runaway have like an open net, but are very good at picking out the best pieces of whatever they find in that net. Two other people, or, you said, Dip, Runner and Huk are the two best talent spotters. I'm going to extend that to the organizations and definitely agree with you. I think there's two others that you have to credit. One is the Philadelphia Fusion, because with both Fusion and Fusion Uni, they picked up two bomb-ass teams, and both of those teams were apparently the last teams to be formed in their respective competitions. So Fusion were the last team to sign in the Overwatch League, and the last roster, I think, to get confirmed. So they didn't have their pick of the litter at all, and yet they found talents like Neptuno, who only got 1 owl offer, EQO, who was utterly unknown, really, only played for like Zen Gaming, a full Israeli team, and didn't have that much success, and then trialed for Complexity, I want to say, something like that. Trialed for an NA team at some point though, and played for them in a couple of matches, but very unknown talent, and got unreal level performances out of them. Sado as well, totally unknown, and actually a pretty great main tank for them. So yeah, they definitely deserve credit, and their university team as well, fantastic. And then the last one to give credit to, in my opinion, is Toronto Defiant. I think Toronto Defiant did a great job at picking up unknown players, applying a bit of a Moneyball-esque way of running it, where they really take a hardcore look at the stats with Barrow from Winston's lab, and they have a philosophy for how they want to build the team, a little like a little like how Boston Uprising have a philosophy for how they want to build their team. And Toronto Defiant have taken that stats-based system, the philosophy as well, and their in-depth knowledge of the Korean contenders scene from guys like Bishop and Bubbly and Don. And they have really created a good team out of hidden talents. Nobody was... I don't want to say nobody, but very few people were singing the praises of people like Ivy or Yakpung or and people had kind of given up on Envy. People were praising Neko, but that was a good pickup. Roki slipped under the radar of a lot of people, so I think this team's done a very good scouting job and coaching job in general. Slypher says, do you think 12-man rosters can be sustainable? If so, what do you think it would take to keep all 12 players happy? I think they can be sustainable, but it's very difficult. Because not only do you have to keep them happy playing on the bench, but also, in general, teams are very hard-pressed to give people on the bench scrim time. Scrims are an absolute premium. When players don't get fatigued, as in traditional sports, you can just scrim almost infinitely, right? Apart from the time that you literally have to rest, otherwise your players will fucking explode. I mean, you're basically just playing matches, literal matches, like full matches, that would kill traditional sports players to play. You're playing like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of matches. You're just simulating the match environment over and over and over and over and over again, back to back, day to day. Like, mentally taxing, yes, but you can get away with it because it's not physically taxing. So, a big difference between traditional sports and esports. And because that environment exists, the more scrims that you can fit in, the better your team will be able to perform. So if at any point you remove players from the active roster to scrim with benched players, you're actually falling behind that race. It's like you just sat there and didn't scrim for a day. You're giving your opponents an advantage, because if you don't keep up with the scrim race, you're going to fall behind. If you're not scrimming constantly all the time, you're going to fall behind. You're not going to be the best team in the league. You're not going to be constantly working on things. You're not going to... Of course, there's other things that come into it, like VOD reviewing and personal stuff and working on your own mechanics and these kind of things. But teams are finding it very hard to rotate players in off the bench and give them effective practice time, because you fall behind in the race. You want to focus on a core of 6. Some teams are very good at being able to make this work. The 9-man roster from NYXL worked pretty well, which other teams rotated in talent nicely. Fusion had a decent system where they rotated in Snillo. There's probably a bunch of other examples. I just can't think of them at the moment. But Shock have currently got a 12-man roster, and that is interesting to me. And it looks like they tried to have a plan for it. They had Architect in at the beginning, subbed him out for Rascal, alright? But they had rotations. For Busan, they'd bring in Smurf. They'd also try and bring in Striker and Rascal before, when Architect was normally the first player. And they'd try and run more DPS-heavy stuff. Didn't work out. And that team looked much worse than their main team. And eventually they narrowed in on a starting 6 that they always ran. But they have so much depth on their bench that they are very meta-proof. So if the meta constantly switches every stage, then maybe those bench players won't be mad that they're on the bench, or will enjoy contributing, because they'll actually see playtime. And if you're on the bench, you just have to sit there and look and think, okay, I'm not as useful this stage, but next stage, that could be where I'm like a real big power player. but we didn't see too many huge meta-changing patches last season, so that wasn't really something to take into account. This season, it seems like we'll see quite a lot more. Pogey says, do you have more faith in Florida Mayhem or Washington Justice in turning their franchise around? That genuinely does depend on whether Justice will continue to spend money on better players. And also, I've heard a lot in the works about Florida Mayhem making changes for the future as well. So both of these teams, I would expect to sign a lot of players compared to, not just one or two, but maybe more than that over the course of the season. 3, 4 new additions, all that would be on the starting lineup, making the team very different to the starting roster at the beginning of the season. Now, which team do I have more faith in? I don't know what the finances are like for these teams. I don't know how much they're willing to spend on new players. I don't know who's doing the scouting, apart from Bare Hands for the Florida Mayhem, but maybe he's got limitations. The pickup of McGravy seems to indicate that Florida Mayhem are going to go for, first of all, Western players, against Bare Hands' previous philosophy, and also more hidden players or players with potential. The pickup of Arc from Justice suggests they're willing to spend big cash, but only on the players that Wizard Young really wants in the team. I don't have much faith in Wizard as a head coach, but the way that Mayhem are operating there, if they're trying to pick up players like McGravy, I don't see that bring them big wins as well. I think that'll make them improve. McGravy's a fine pickup, but it's not going to turn the whole season around. And it's probably going to be too gradual. So, in summary, I don't have faith in either of these two teams to turn their franchise around. But we'll see over the course of the season. If you were a general manager, Formation asks, and had to sign one of these two, which would it be? Logix or Davin? I would sign... I've got fucking chocolate all over my fingers. It depends what the meta is. For this meta, Davin definitely, I think. He just has so much experience of GOATs, the game knowledge from working underneath Sata. I'm amazed, honestly, that he wasn't signed for the Paris Eternal when he's a very competent Zarya with a lot of experience. And the Zaryas that they ended up signing were Soon and Shadowburn, two people that are not known for their Zarya performance whatsoever. And that ended up really hurting Paris. But okay. I think if it came to more like Widowmaker, McCree, flicky hit scan kind of stuff, or maybe even the Tracer, I think Logix has more mechanical skill. But Davin seems to be a smarter player. I would gravitate towards Davin, because he has proven success as well. But I think there's a very good argument for Logix, especially if the meta was favoring him. Precoixious asks, what player do you have a bias for or has a special place in your heart? We didn't really get to spend too much time with the players last season because teams were very busy scrimming. They didn't really want to associate with us because they thought we were like talking shit about them on the desk and stuff. And I don't know. They were like I don't know. Anyway, the players that I did associate with, a bunch of people on the Fusion. I always love talking to EQO and Neptuno. They're very intelligent, and they're very articulate, and they also have very strong opinions. You always learn something, and you always have a good discussion whenever you talk to EQO and Neptuno. But I'll tell you what, Super has definitely stolen the player I have a bias for, or a special place in my heart. He's so fucking funny, and he's I hung out with him a couple of times last year. He was at the Super Bowl party that the Fusion hosted, and he was cheering for the Philadelphia Eagles. Is that the team? And they won, and he went fucking nuts. But he's so fucking funny that, yeah. babyblu says, NA main tanks are famously a joke with not much top tier talent. Do you associate regions with certain roles? Conversely, who sucks at what? I think, having talked about Super actually, Super's actually turning around that perception of NA main tanks not having very much talent. Obviously, it was always him and Moomer at the top, but I think he's far overtaken Moomer at this point, and under the coaching of Krusty, seems to have really massively improved. Not just his Rhine, but his Winston actually looks a lot better as well. His primals are still kind of not great, but his overall Winston play is super good. Super good. Wow. I associate... Yes, I do associate certain roles with certain regions. China I associate with very fucking ballsy, mad, but mechanically talented players. Mostly on DPS. China produces a bunch of Jinmus, where they are very talented, but they just turn their brain off sometimes, and they just go hyper aggressive, and they're very easy to be picked off, or they play weird stuff at the wrong times, this kind of shit. Europe is tanks, mainly, but not Winston. It's Reinhardt. Europe just seems to shit out Reinhardts because they played quad tank for so long, and they played goats to a pretty high level, and they didn't want to play dive. Didn't want to play too much DPS, so definitely I associate Europe with Reinhardts. Korea, I associate with Winston and D.Va players, particularly. The Korean D.Vas are by far and away the best. The Korean Winstons are by far and away the best. And also the Korean kind of tanks in general. But certainly other regions are comparatively closer on Rhine and Orisa and Ball and stuff like that. Well, maybe not Ball, but okay. Basically, the heroes that require a lot of intelligence, Korea. Lucio as well, Korea. Zen, Korea. This kind of stuff. What else? Yeah, that might be it. What do I associate with NA? NA, I genuinely just associate with being pretty shit. I think North America has suffered from having too much money, so it tends to import talent rather than develop its own talent. And the players in NA don't seem to have the same chip on their shoulder or work ethic or this kind of shit. I'm not sure what it is. But the good players in NA tend to be the outliers rather than the norm. Are they really known for anything in particular? I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't associate DPS with being great in the NA region. I don't know. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but I don't really have strong associations with NA other than being fairly poo. Alright, anyway. Dip says, is it worth London keeping birdring given his frequent inconsistency and poor play? Birdring is mad inconsistent and also generally quite poor. I agree with both of those assessments. His play in the playoffs last year was pretty good, but the team is clearly built around Profit, and I think that birdring could be good on another team. I don't think that players are just good or bad. It's not that black and white. Players can be good on certain teams if you build around them. They can be good on different teams if they have higher motivation. They can work better with a certain system, this kind of stuff. So I think birdring, if he was still the focal player of a team, might be able to give us some more old birdring-esque kind of performances. Certainly the wrist issues from last year weren't a help, along with any other things that may have been bundled in as wrist issues, which were actually due to, I don't know, motivation or his mentality or any of this kind of stuff. But the problem is, your question was, is it worth London keeping birdring? Yes, because who do you get if not birdring? It's hard to imagine one of the teams trading somebody really good to the London Spitfire for birdring, because why would they? If you're going to try and pick someone up just out of the blue, there aren't really that many players that you would want in that role. I don't know, maybe you can try and get value out of Climax. Maybe, I don't know. You have to kind of dig deep in the barrel to be able to find a very good Korean hitscan player that hasn't already been picked up by the league. And like I said, I don't think anyone's going to trade. And I don't think London would want to get rid of birdring. I think London themselves still believe in birdring, although not on Zarya. And they wouldn't want to give birdring to another team that would potentially revitalize birdring's career, because then they have to face against him. So if you give birdring to, I don't know, the Toronto Defiant, for example, which they could really use a player like birdring. I think the coaching might even do a really good job with birdring. He might end up flourishing under that team. And then, unfortunately, if you're the London Spitfire, you then have to play against birdring, who's having potentially having a revitalization of his career and looking like Aldring again. So, I think London are going to hang on to birdring. Captain James T. Kink says, is there an American food you've enjoyed or want to try? I love American food. Don't get me wrong. When I complain about America or American bread and stuff like this, it's in the context of me absolutely loving living in America. I love being here. I love the weather in California. I do miss things like fucking rivers and trees and forest and stuff like that. And because I grew up surrounded by that kind of stuff, and we are kind of in the middle of more deserty, sandy, shrub land. If I had a car, I would go and travel and visit those areas much more, but I don't, and I don't really have any intention of doing so at this time in my life anyway. But to hone in on food, by far and away the number one thing that America does better than everywhere else is beef. The beef is incredible. The steak is like nothing I've tasted anywhere else. It's so good. There's a bunch of food. Oh, and good Mexican food as well. I'm not the biggest fan of Mexican food. I don't find it incredible, but it's certainly nice. And it's something that I would almost never eat in the UK, because the UK doesn't have a very big Mexican population, doesn't have a very big call for Mexican food. Mexican restaurants are very uncommon, so it's nice to have that. I mean, fucking burritos can be delicious. Hate cilantro though, which I call, in fact I've forgotten the fucking name for it. Coriander. Man, I'm losing my genuine English words because I've had to replace them with a bunch of Americanisms. Like I sometimes call it the fucking sidewalk and this kind of stuff, or the trash. When I'm back home, my parents take the piss out of me for speaking like an American, because nobody understands what the fuck I'm talking about if I say put it in the bin, or walk on the pavement or whatever. So yeah, Dip says, why do Envy and Ivy think that the best player on Toronto is Yakpung? They see some potential in him, but Envy rates him as one of the best players in the league, but Yakpung hasn't looked standout so far. Number 1 in damage block, though. Quite a bit to dig into here. I think that Toronto genuinely believe in Yakpung, and but we haven't really seen him play that much Winston, which was his core hero. His primals are apparently really good, and he's apparently also a very intelligent player. Now, he certainly hasn't looked standout so far, but the style of the Toronto Defiant is not a flashy standout style. And actually, Yakpung's been performing okay. When Soe said on the desk, Yakpung's the worst main tank in the playoffs, I think that is fair, because in order to be a main tank in the playoffs in this meta, you had to be pretty good, and you had to play Reinhardt, and a lot of them were really good Reinhardt players. I mean, was there anybody that I would consider worse than Yakpung in the playoffs? Who are the bottom teams? No, I don't think so. Okay, but Yakpung is not a feeder, which is a great asset to have. He makes the percentage plays. If you tell him to do something, if you coach him to do something, he's going to do it. And the style of the Toronto Defiant was about minimizing positioning errors and getting value out of ults and playing the game correctly and actually like getting value out of their engagements and making sure to minimize their own errors. And Yakpung was good at that. He works within the Toronto Defiant system. I wouldn't say personally that he's one of the best main tanks in the league, like Envy thinks, but he could be a developing talent that ends up looking like a top 5 or 10 main tank in the league if what Toronto sees in him is realized when Winston comes back into the meta. I don't think at the moment he's I think he might be a top 10 tank in the league right now, but I'm not 100% sure because I haven't created that list in my head. But he's somewhere around there. I don't think he's trash. And I don't even think he's the worst player in Toronto. Like, I believe it was Monty who said that. But yeah, I think the main issue is the style that Defiant played doesn't have Yakpung popping off. He wasn't like a super aggressive Ryan that was going to take the game into his own hands, which, you know, you can raise that as a fault of him as well. You certainly could get more value out of Ryan than Yakpung did. But I would wait and see with him. And I think that he's a pretty intelligent player. Dip says, who would you rate alongside Bumper and Mano as the top 5 main tanks at the moment in GOATS meta? Okay, so this is pretty similar. So I would have Super definitely up there, especially after his finals performance in the Stage 1 title match. Super played out of his fucking mind. If it was up to me, I would have given him player of the match despite his team losing. Wasn't up to me though. So I'd have Super, Bumper, and Mano, I think, as the top 3 main tanks. Once Seoul fixed their shit, Fissure looked pretty good as well. Let's see. I'm going to actually bring up the teams so that I don't forget about anybody. So, yeah, I think Fissure was still a very good main tank. I think you've kind of got to put Fusions up there. Because of his calling as well. Because of his calling and his leadership. Is there anybody else that I'm missing out? I think, I mean, I'm sure some people will be spamming Amon if I was streaming live now, but I don't think Amon's as good as those guys. But the weird shit is that he plays ball so much, it's hard. He's kind of in a different category, isn't he? And we haven't seen too much of his Ryan play, really. So for this meta, I'm going to kind of discount Amon, because that's a whole other question. I think Rio and Gushra both looked pretty decent. Rio the better of that, but would I put Rio over Fusions and Fissure? No, I don't think so. I think Rio just misses out on my top 5. I wouldn't put Raw up there either, or Fate. Marvel looked decent when he played, but again, I haven't really seen enough tape of him to be able to put him up there. But yeah, that's who I'd go with then. I'd go with Mano, Super, Bumper, Fissure, and Fusions. Precoixious asks, how are you a good analyst while simultaneously being an absolute bot at the game? First of all, I take great offense at the fact that you call me an absolute bot at the game. I'm a legend. I'm the highest ranked talent member in the whole of the Overwatch League. Actual gaming god right here. Gaming god. But to give you a real answer is because the effort it would require to get good at this game, I'm not willing to invest. I'm not even willing to think about when I make decisions in game. So I think that tells you everything you need to know. I'm not willing to engage my brain because when I play Overwatch, it's a time for turn brain off and shoot thing. I don't want to get good. Now, the question is, even if I did want to get good, could I be good? Probably not. I'm a fucking bot at video games, but there you go. It's a very different skill set, you know, being an analyst and being a good player. Like, you have way more information, but you also have the benefit of hindsight to look back and like realize what the best play was. When you're actually making decisions in the moment, it's a totally different and, in my opinion, far more advanced skill. and requires a lot more intuition rather than deduction. Booshki says, if you were tasked with making a new team out of benched owl players, who would your starting 6 be? This is a cracker of a question. I love this. Making a new team out of benched owl players. Okay, what should we call them? The Benjamin Bench? No, what's a good city? The Busan Bench Boys. How about that? Okay, the Busan Bench Boys. Busan Bench Boys. We'd have to pick a full Korean team. Nah, I'm not going to make it. You know, I'll just assume that there's no communication issues, and I'll just pick the best players from each team that could probably play on some kind of English-speaking roster. So for the main support, let's start there. Does Ark count as a benched boy? I would go with Ark for sure if he counts. Bilingual, very talented, pretty good at Lucio, very good at Mercy. Very intelligent, shot caller as well. Would definitely go with Ark. Now, he's probably starting for the Washington Justice, so maybe not a bench boy, but if I couldn't pick Ark, I suppose I'd go maybe with Custer. Seems like a decent pickup. For the flex support, I think the best benched flex support is probably Repel, maybe, on the Vancouver Titans. Guys, stats aren't great, but that's normally because they just sub him in when they're fucking around on the 4th map. But I think probably Repel is the best. Who else would I go with? Sleepy from the SF Shock is really good and has a pretty safe style that I like. I think he's a pretty intelligent player. He's good. He wouldn't get tilted by being on the bench. Who else? Maybe Reaper from the LA Gladiators. I'd be willing to take a punt on him. I'd be willing to try him, put him on the bench of my Busan Bench Boys and see if he makes the starting lineup. I don't really know, you know, we haven't seen Reaper play against high-level competition. We haven't seen him fielded in the Overwatch League, so hard to say, but probably Repel or Sleepy. And maybe Sleepy's the better pick, honestly. For my main tank, I think I would go with probably Cloudy from Paris. I think LH Cloudy's got a lot of potential. I'm amazed that they didn't start him to begin with. I think they absolutely should have started him, and they're probably going to be kicking themselves that they ended up not fielding him at all in the meta where he was already coached by Satan and was so good and played like a more nuanced style than Ben Best and Cruz is calling, where they just fucking go balls to the wall. But yeah, I would go with Cloudy. I think the guy's got a good Rhine, a good Winston as well, which is rare in in EU main tanks. Am I missing anybody? Is there somebody sick that's on a bench from like Korea or something? Smurf, I suppose, but I'd be willing to take more of a... I'd try more of a risk with Cloudy, honestly, than Smurf. Am I missing anybody else? No, I think so. I think I'll go with Cloudy. For my off-tank, I definitely know who I'm going to pick, though. I'm going to pick Nevix from the Shock. Choi's been in their starting roster pretty much the whole time, but Nevix is a god-tier gamer. So smart, improved a lot on D.Va since last season, and he was already pretty decent last season. For sure, one of the best Western D.Va players on the same tier as Space and Poco, and Note. So, for sure, I'm going with Nevix for my off-tank. For DPS, there's actually a shit ton of good bench DPS players, right? Like, NYXL has Sabi Olby, and Shock has Striker. And then there's a bunch of other people that are benched as well. But I think I'd go for... I think of the two, I might even go for Striker over Sabi Olby. It depends what the meta would be, obviously, but I think if it was Goats, then I'd go with Striker, because he can kind of play Zarya, and I don't know what Sabi Olby's like at all on that hero. But I don't know. Either of those two would be a sick pick for the hit scan role. And then Architect would be a fucking great projectile DPS and like brig player who's on the bench. I suppose actually that I haven't considered any of the Seoul Dynasty B team, because they've been benched for the majority of stage 1, but they have actually been seeing playtime. Otherwise, Marvel would be a really good pick over LH Cloudy, and I might even consider picking Toby up rather than Custer if Ark isn't eligible, and yeah, maybe Zumba over Nevix as well. But I don't think that they should really count as being benched because Seoul actually do have 2 rosters. Like, they're the control specialists. So yeah, so that's what it would be. I guess it would be Ark, Repel, Cloudy, Nevix, Striker, Architect. So it's basically, I mean, Striker, Architect, Nevix is half of the Shock's bench team. And then if I ran Sleepy as well, that'd be even more of the Shock. So I guess I'm running the Shock B team with Cloudy and Ark. There you go. Precoixious, last question, says, what are your stage 2 hot takes? Okay, let's try and think of some hot takes. Vancouver Titans go undefeated again. Back-to-back undefeated stages. That's a hot take, but it certainly could happen. I think Titans are very set to beat Boston Uprising's unbeaten record from last season. Boston Uprising won 14 matches in a row, including some stage title matches, so you can include the ones from Vancouver as well. So Vancouver are currently on 10. That means they'd have to win 4 more games. And the strength of schedule is... Actually, I think Titans have something like the 3rd or 5th hardest strength of schedule, but that's because the average of the teams they play against is pretty high. But the actual teams they play against aren't that bad. I mean, they play against Dallas, Spark, Seoul, Outlaws, Uprising. Those are their next 5 games. Like, who out of those guys is going to beat them? Not Boston and Houston. Maybe Seoul. Maybe Spark, depending on what the meta is. Maybe Dallas if they have an unreal performance on opening week. But I think Vancouver are set to beat Boston's match win streak record. And probably set... If they perform like they are now, and if the meta doesn't totally fuck with them, they could go undefeated in stage 2 as well. Which would be nuts. Unreal. But okay, that's, you know, it's too early to say that for sure, because we don't know what the meta is, that's why it's a hot take. What are some of my other stage 2 hot takes? I mean, the problem with hot takes is I don't know how hot any of these are. I mean, I think Valiant will continue to underperform. I think Gladiators will be a top team. I think London will be a top team again. I think Spark will be a top team. I think they'll fix their issues. I think Mayhem and Justice will continue to underperform. How about this one? This might be a hot take. I think the addition of Ark on the Justice will be a huge advantage to them. I think that team has shit shot calling. And I think that Ark being on that team could make them not the worst team in the league. I mean, Florida Mayhem are already down there, but I think Justice could actually turn into an okay team in stage 2. And I don't mean okay like middling. I mean okay like not a fucking joke. Because at the moment they're a fucking joke. So Washington Justice will stop being clowns in season 2. In stage 2. What else? Stage 2 hot takes. How about this one? Batiste will not be in the meta. That's my hot take. I think his kit is very, very powerful in a vacuum, but I can't really think of a meta composition that wouldn't just get beaten by a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, I'm struggling to think how he would fit into comps, so I think he might just have a very low playtime. Yeah, let me try and think of one more hot take to end on. These are my thinking noises. Stage 2 hot takes. I should have prepped for this, shouldn't I? I should have prepped. I shouldn't have tried to wing it. Oh. No. I was going to say something about... No. No. What about... Okay, no, that's shit as well. I was going to say something about fusions not being very good in stage 2, but that's not really that hot. Actually, that might be hot. People seem to mad overrate fusions, I think. But I think his Rhine is probably all he can play to a really high level. And I think his shot calling will suffer when it's outside of goats. So as much as I love the lad, and today is his birthday as well, I think, I'm going to have to end this video by saying, hot take, fusions will not be a top main tank in stage 2. Even though I put him as a top 5 main tank in stage 1.